OverSoul 7, The Museum of Time, by Jane Roberts. Read by Martin John. Chapter 3. OverSoul 7 takes a body and finally meets the right George. Cypress was a speck of light in the office waiting room of George Bainbridge's 20th century residence. George was waiting in the office across the hall for the arrival of his new associate, Dr. Seven. George whistled under his breath, turned on the radio, squinted at the pigeons on the window ledge, and hoped to hell that the new arrangement was going to work out. But Cypress could tell that Seven was either waylaid or had taken a wrong turn in time or space. He wasn't in this space at this time. Slightly exasperated, she loosened her own consciousness from its precise orientation with time, but maintained the same space coordinates. From her present probable position, her consciousness went whirling through the room's futures. Still no Seven, so Cypress started to ruffle quickly through the past. Almost at once she saw Seven wandering around, a good 100 years off, but in space hardly a few feet away. She materialized as the ancient but young woman teacher and stood beside him. George Bainbridge, glancing into the window in his time, saw no one, of course. "Seven, you're in the wrong time," Cypress announced. "I went back into the past," Seven cried, "and met George's grandfather. He was wearing his favorite 14-year-old male image." Cypress smiled, almost. "I didn't realize that you were methodical enough to do such background reference," she said. Seven smiled modestly. "I thought maybe you just got lost," Cypress said. Seven blushed. "Well, there must have been a reason why I ended up in the wrong time with the wrong George," he said defensively. "Exactly," Cypress replied. "Remember that later. But you don't even have a real body yet, and George expects you at any moment." "You do mean a body, not just an image?" Seven asked. "A body. I told you that before," Cypress replied, laughing. "And you have to make it in the right time period so it will fit properly. That means that we have to return to the 20th century first." Seven looked dejected. "How come you're so much better at time traveling than I am?" he asked plaintively. "Sometimes I have no problems, and then, well, I get confused." "All right," Cypress said. "Look at the chair beside you." Seven did, as he was told, studying the red velvet Victorian armchair until it suddenly shimmered and became the leather rocker in George's 20th century waiting room. "That's the easiest way for you to do it now," Cypress said. "There are better ways, and before long you'll know what they are." "Where is that guy?" George muttered from his office. "Well, where's your body?" Cypress demanded. "Isn't it ready?" Seven sighed. "I haven't even had time to think about a body, much less do anything about getting one," he said disconsolately. "We just can't have your body suddenly appearing from nowhere in the middle of the room, either, said Cypress. Stop pouting, Seven. Come over here, around the corner, where George can't see you from his office. They stood by a corner of the fireplace in the waiting room. Now, Cypress directed, first adopt the image you want. A young man is best. About 26 years old will do. As for the rest, use your imagination. Rather regretfully, Seven dismissed his 14-year-old image entirely and started over. He stood 6'3". His hair was almost black and bushy. He added a beard, then removed it. First his eyes were blue, then he changed them to brown. What about the mouth? He asked Cypress. Hurry, Seven, she said scoldingly. Decide on one clear image and let that be that. So Seven changed his hair to a bushy dark brown, added a rather high forehead, a resolute jaw, so he'd look trustworthy. The mouth just seemed to come of itself. It belonged to the 14-year-old image he liked so well, except that its mischievous humor was modified by a slight turn downward. That's it, Seven cried. All right now, Cypress said. Try to keep your consciousness as clear and still as you can. This will take a moment. Seven wasn't sure exactly what Cypress did then. He felt his image slowly solidify. Invisible atoms rushed from the four corners of the earth to congregate within the form. He felt tremendous activity. Then, in a flash, he felt the activity from inside. The heart was pumping blood. The blood flowed through the brand new veins. His pulse started like a tiny clock. Seven grinned, trying out his facial muscles. He'd been inside a few of his personality's bodies before, to help them out for one reason or another, but this was different, a body of his own. A strange sense of possessiveness overtook him. This living parcel of earth belonged to him. Let no one trespass. I see the experience isn't so undesirable after all, Cypress said dryly. But there seems to be something you've forgotten. What? Seven asked. He looked down at the elastic flesh and felt within it the ambitious inner organs, all snapping to attention. Everything's there as far as I can see. Seven, Cypress said meaningfully. Seven grinned brilliantly. Oh, the clothes! I forgot the clothes, he said. Precisely. Cypress shook her head. I hope you've done your homework and know what garments you want, she said. Now make an image of the clothes and I'll fill them. Seven was actually quite proud of himself. He formed the image of undershorts figured with apple trees and a black turtleneck undershirt. Cypress quickly turned these from images into real items of clothing. How do you do that? Seven asked. The same as with your body, Cypress replied. I haven't time to explain. I cause the atoms in space to thicken and congregate. But what else do you need? The piece de resistance. Seven answered proudly, and on top of the underclothes he formed the image of a dark green polyester suit with the tiniest of green and white checks. "What do you think of that?" he asked. "Perfect late 1980s. "Well, do you look like a young dental associate?" Cypress said doubtfully. "I hope so," Seven retorted. "I studied and studied and studied so that I'd be sure to fit in. It's just that I didn't realize that dentists in this century went barefoot," Cypress said, laughing and staring into Seven's new bright and astonished brown eyes. Instantly Seven formed the image of socks and black boots. "The socks are treated with deodorant," he said. "I saw some like them in George's dresser. Most of these clothes are based on his wardrobe, so he has to like the way I dress." When Cypress continued to laugh, he said defensively, "Well, there's an awful lot to remember. Your humor at my expense." "You just look so earthly," Cypress replied, trying to control herself. "You have no idea. You look like a young dandy." "I don't," Seven protested. "I look like a young dental associate. You said so yourself." But suddenly Cypress was serious. She filled in his socks and boots. "Remember, your body is only a temporary one," she warned, "and treat it kindly. There are some things you're used to doing that you can't do with it, and some places it won't go, but you'll learn all that." "What places?" Seven asked, a bit alarmed, but Cypress had no time to answer. Again George Bainbridge muttered loudly, "Damn! Where is that guy?" This time he came out into the hallway. Cypress said, "Quick, walk to the hall so it looks as if you came from the waiting room," and she vanished. Dr. George Bainbridge, the third, was 39, slightly stouter than he should be for his unimposing 5 feet 6½ inches. In fact, Seven thought he was a trifle jowly, and his brown hair was nondescript. His mustache and eyebrows were both rather shaggy, but extremely expressive. Both were moving, it seemed, all the while. And George Bainbridge's eyes, though small and a bit sunken, were, well, dynamic. People probably didn't notice George's eyes much, Seven mused, because he kept them half closed a good deal of the time. But then, whammo! They opened wide all the way, usually to express an amazed appraisal of the person whom he'd been talking so mildly. And sometimes the eyes grinned all by themselves. Right now, George's eyes did their grinning act as he looked at the newly minted Seven. "Super," George said. "You must be my new assistant." Young Dr. Seven smiled and stepped forward, extending his hand in the accepted Earth fashion. "Super, super, super, George Bainbridge," said again, squeezing Seven's new hand so tightly and with such force that Seven almost felt like whimpering. Tonight's garbage time, though. I have to stack the garbage cans outside. It'll only take a minute, and drive to the corner store for some pickles. Whole trip will only take 2 minutes. Then you and I can relax, have a few drinks, and eat dinner. Make yourself at home. Be right back. And before Seven could answer, George bounded toward the rear of the house, leaving Seven flabbergasted and a bit annoyed. All that rushing on his part just so George could pile the garbage? And there he was alone in the house again. The house that just wasn't trustworthy, he thought. Then, almost without thinking about it, he went into George's 20th century waiting room. I never should have called the house untrustworthy, he said later to Cypress. But of course I did, and it was. In chapter 3. Oh my gosh. Peace, light, and love. Aloha.